Welcome back. So, not as good as a week as last week. Um, we'll start off with the good, and then we'll descend into hell. So bear with me for a moment. Let's talk about good music that dropped. MGMT, Loss of Life. So, has a critic score of a 77 and a user score of a 76. As I said in the last video, this was my first introduction to a full MGMT album, and I know the sound of this band has changed ever since Little Dark Age. But with Loss of Life, I'm really enjoying this album quite a bit. And it's this weird feeling where it sounds like it's in the past, but in the way it sounds so present day that it has this really cool kind of mix and it contrasts so well together. My favorite track is People in the Streets, and it just has these amazing moments, especially and these outros on all of these songs are so vibrant. They're so just gorgeous. They're so well executed. There's so many things going on all at once. And they all just come together in this piece where it just feels so euphoric and it sounds so just transportive. And that's what I really like about this record. It feels like it's a foot in the past, but it's also a foot in the present. Another one of my favorite tracks is honestly the intro, where it has kind of this N64 video game kind of 8-bit compression kind of sound to it. And while it's just an intro, it's such a good way of setting up this album. I believe it's called The Streets of Babylon or Dancing of Babylon with Christine and the Queens. Another amazing track. And just overall, this is an amazing start to MGMT for myself. And I'm going to have to go back and listen to the rest of the records, especially Little Dark Age now, considering that I really enjoyed this quite a bit. With that being said, though, I do feel like this album, while it's 10 tracks long, it's 46 minutes, some songs can feel like they're a little bit longer than they should be. In particular, the actual title track does kind of overstay its welcome. It's over 5 minutes, and a lot of it towards the end is a lot more instrumental backed, which still, mind you, still sounds great. But I feel like just little bits of fat could be trimmed from this record to make it that much more of an all killer, no filler experience. And what I do really like about this record too is that Loss of Life is the outro, and then the beginning track is Loss of Life Part 2. So when you really think about it, you could play this album over and over and over again, and it's going to sound cohesive, which is a really cool thing. And I remember King Gizzard and Lizard Wizard put out an album that did the exact same thing, where it just kind of repeat itself over and over and over again. So overall, I really enjoyed this album, and I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. So I've been getting out a lot of 8s. I've given it a couple of 9s. Overall, this has just been a really good past couple months for music. But I don't think you're here to hear about the good stuff. I think you're here to hear about the bad shit. So let's start with Kid Cudi with Insano, the Nitro Mega Deluxe. So, it has no critic score. I would be surprised if it has a critic score, if people even bother to review this thing. And it has a user score of a 55. So, I'm pretty sure that's around the same, if not lower, than the original Insano. Now, how I started off this Nitro Mega, the first 4 or 5 tracks were actually quite promising. There was a lot more Kid Cudi humming. There was a lot of Kid Cudi harmonies. The beats sounded good. And I was just like, man, maybe Kid Cudi listens. Maybe for some reason he held this up so that way the second part of this Insano cycle is going to end off with a bang or going to end off with something a little bit more familiar. I really like Chunky in particular. The hook on it is great. But then it gets to Willis. I don't know who Chip the Rapper is, and I feel like he's been around for a while, because I think I remember seeing Chip the Rapper on like Indie Cut all the way back like in 2013 or something around that timeline. But whenever Chip the Rapper shows up on this album, it becomes so shit that it just becomes impossible to get through sometimes. And Willis is one of the worst tracks of this year. Kid Cudi just goes into this weird vocal inflection. This beat is wonky, it's strange. It could work if you executed it. Honestly, if Kid Cudi just played it straight, this song would just be okay. Or you could probably exemplify it to make it good. But the way Kid Cudi sings on this, it reminds me of, what's the name of that guy who sings the theme song or the thing for Toy Story? I think it's Paul Newman. It reminds me of Paul Newman going to a strip club, getting drunk out of his mind, and harassing women. That's what this song sounds like to me. It's gross, it's offensive to my ears, and Chip the Rapper just exemplifies that at the end. But that's not all of the terribleness that is on this deluxe. Electro-Wave Baby 2.0. Electro-Wave Baby was my favorite song on Insano. It still is. So what does Kid Cudi do with one of my favorite tracks? He gets the most bland EDM artist that I can think of, Steve Aoki, throws the most generic EDM sound onto Electro-Wave Baby and makes it sound so bland, so generic, that it's lifeless. There's no life to it anymore. My favorite part of Electro-Wave Baby, like the original, is after the chorus, it goes into this na-na-na kind of section. And it has like a whistle kind of in the background, and it all just works out, and it's just really nice on the ears, and it perfectly transitions into the verses and back into the chorus when it needs to. This version has it completely gone, and it just goes, it's so cookie cutter, it's so basic, this remix, that I was so offended I almost turned it off the halfway through. I could not sit through it, but I managed to. And then there's Everybody Like. Pusha T is one of my favorite rappers of all time. I'm going to be making a video soon about one of my favorite albums of all time, and it's by Pusha T. Pusha T phones in his verse, which is very disappointing, but Kid Cudi at the start cannot sing for shit. And I know Kid Cudi does not have the most beautiful voice in the world, but he has a unique voice, and he knows how to use it to make incredible moments, make these incredible atmospheres. But on here, it just does not, it just sounds like garbage. He's going into these lower registers, and when he comes out of those lower registers, it just becomes wonky, it becomes all over the place. There's no kind of formula, there's no kind of way of coming out of the lower register to make it sound good. It just sounds bad. That's all the tracks that I didn't like. But most of this album is just really boring. That's the same thing that happened with Insano. There's two moments on here, Rocket and I believe it's like something Dopeness, Dope and Dopeness from these are old recordings from 2007 and 2011. And when you get those moments, it's such a night and day difference that, especially the Dope and Dopeness track, it just sounds so much more just authentic. It sounds so much more in Cudi's wheelhouse, and it's really sad to think of when you get songs like Willis and Everybody Like, and you get songs from like The Vault from back then, and it just makes these songs sound worse. So with this Insano Nitro Mega, it's really hard to rate this thing because a lot of it is boring, but when those moments come that are bad, it makes it sound so much worse. So for the current moment, I am going to give it a 3 out of 10. That's the lowest I think I've given on these ratings, but don't worry, it's gonna go lower. So French Montana with Mac and Cheese 5. I listen to this shit. So it has no critic score. Don't bother. If you are a if you are some pitchfork or some kind of guy that's randomly found my channel, don't waste your time. User score of a 27. That's fair. Honestly, that's kind of giving it too much high praise. This album, mixtape, whatever you want to call it, is just another generic French Montana album. And it makes me more offended at the beginning of this album where it talks about it's just like, oh, no one respects me. Oh, no one knows who you are. Oh, you have all these streams where like they're not your songs. Like it reminds me of Logic and just Logic just trying to reinforce himself and it just doesn't work. And French Montana almost goes into that on the first track of this thing. And this album again, there's no soul. It's the same flow every single time. French Montana doesn't have anything to say or anything to prove. There's nothing kind of changing the wheel. And I mean, albums don't need to change the wheel every time. Albums don't need to reinvent or kind of revolutionize their genre or revolutionize their artist. But man, this album is just copy paste from probably the past like 25 mac and cheeses or past 25 albums, mixtapes, whatever you want to call it. How many mac and cheeses have you made? It's just there's nothing to this album. There's pure nothingness. All that this has is features. Now, I could say that the features were good, or I can say that the features were the best part of it, but let's be honest here. Do you hear anyone talking about any features from Mac and Cheese 5? Even from people like Westside Gunn, even from people like JID, like the two people that you would expect to have some amazing features. Nope. Jid has a good feature, but then it's contrasted with French Montana, and I believe one of the lines that he says on this album is that you took the L out of Lover, that's when I knew it was over. Son of a bitch. It's just when you contrast it with Jid, and he has these great lines. There's a Colin Kaepernick bar that really hits, and there's a rapper with skill. There's a rapper with personality. There's a rapper with charisma, and then French Montana shows up and just phones it in. It just makes these songs sound so bad. I don't know if you noticed, but I've added a new category called What the Hell, and these are just really bad tracks. Goals is a song with Jeremiah, and I didn't know Party Next Door was on it either. But the big reason why I don't like this track is Jeremiah is like this close to the microphone, and you can hear the breaths, you can hear every single detail that you should not hear on a professional recording. And not to mention, Jeremiah and French Montana, they just do not sound good together. Millionaire Row is a party anthem, trying to be a party anthem with Rick Ross and Lil Wayne. What do you expect? Lil Wayne and Rick Ross phone in their features, and it's a terrible kind of ED. It's like a rave kind of like trying to get the dance floor going, but it's just a whimper and it's just terrible. But what makes this even worse, there's 5 versions of this album. Sped up, slowed down, acapella. Freaking, you'll probably get chopped and screwed at some point too. French Montana is also threatening to drop a deluxe next week if it gets enough likes. I believe I looked at the total amount of runtime that all of these albums run. Not to mention he released all of these songs as singles, and he released all these things separately. And there's one that's just all compilations, and it's like 6 hours long. What tops it for me is that I recently saw a tweet of French Montana defending what he has done. And basically, he says just like Taylor has been releasing Taylor versions, Taylor Swift. She has been releasing Taylor versions for all of her albums. So and French Montana says at the end is that she is a genius for doing that. I don't know that they aren't the same thing. it's really just not the same thing, because obviously it isn't, because Taylor is not releasing, or at least not right now at the moment, not releasing sped up, slowed down, acapella, all these versions to her albums. I don't know how you can coincide the two and use it as a defense for putting out so much garbage onto streaming services. And not to mention, too, there was a point in time where if I was to look up West Side Gun, if I go to the single section of Spotify, I would get all of the singles with French Montana, the West Side Gun, and it would just fill up almost half of my page because it shows 5 versions of the song: sped up, slowed down, a cappella, chopped and screwed, remix. I don't freaking know anymore. But you're literally just bloating up the streaming services at this point. What's the point of doing this? And now I'm just kind of ranting at this point. Not to mention, too, Kanye on here has some of the most chopped up performances I think I have heard. They sound professionally mixed. They sound like they're good in the mix. They sound okay. But it's like Kanye will say 4 or 5 lines, and then French Montana will come back and say 4 or 5 lines. Kanye will say 3, French Montana says 5. And sure, you can do a back and forth thing, but that happens on both tracks that Kanye is on, and it's just so choppy. It has no kind of rhythm and has no kind of chemistry or formula behind it. It is just messy. This album is messy. This album is boring. This album is insulting. And I was thinking about this because I just came back. I was just hanging out with some people. And I was really thinking, is like, do I hate this more than Lil Dicky with his album Peanut? Because at least with Lil Dicky with Peanut, I can at least say that while there's moments on there that are very questionable, possibly racist, he at least didn't do 5 versions, 6 hours of material. And at least I could say that that album is like funny bad if you really wanted to go into it, Lil Dicky's album. Mac and Cheese is not something that you listen to for fun. It's just something that you listen to for torture. And if I was to give Lil Dicky with the Peanut score, I probably would give it a 1. And you know what? I'm probably going to do the same thing. You get a terrible looking 1. This album does not deserve to exist. The original version and all 75 other versions of it. It has no reason to exist. If you drop a deluxe, I will drop another video and I will slander your name. I do not care anymore because I feel like not only is this just annoying, not only is it just unimaginative, not only is it lazy, not only is it greedy, but it's setting such a terrible precedent for other artists going forward. I don't want to hear these newer artists take the template that so many other TikTok artists and all these people are doing, where you're taking songs or even albums now and making every single song just to try to make it a hit. Even the skits on this mixtape have 5 different versions of them. Not to mention, one of the skits is just 2 old men talking about a woman very sexually, and it just sounds disgusting. You can listen to that sped up. I guess one thing good about this is that if you really want to get through this French Montana album, you can listen to the sped up version. It speeds it up by like 7 minutes. So I've ranted enough. So we went from an 8 to a 3 to a 1. Again, if French Montana drops a deluxe to this shit, I will review it. I don't care. I love pain. And I will listen to it so no one else has to. I haven't got this fumed since I can't even remember. I don't think I've ever been this fumed on an album, on like an aftermath or an album review before. But it's so deserved because it gets so frustrating. But I hope you've had fun watching me suffer. And Listen to this. Don't listen to anything else. Pretend these don't exist. Have a good night.